Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this, which is the third meeting of the Young Onset Alzheimer's Dementia Support Group. I'm Jacquie Nunn, I'm co-lead of the group, and I was a carer for my husband who lived with young onset Alzheimer's. As I said, this is the third meeting of the group, and in the first two meetings, we discussed the rationale for the group, and in the second meeting, we talked about the whole set of issues around work and working lives and how that affects people, particularly around the point of diagnosis immediately after. And for those of you who are new to this group, those recordings are available on our YouTube channel. And so you're very welcome to go and have a look and see what's there by way of background on those. But this afternoon, we're focusing on family relationships and the impact on family relationships of a diagnosis with dementia, young onset Alzheimer's dementia at an earlier stage in life than is typical. Before we get into that theme though, I'd like to introduce Cath Mummery, who is cognitive neurologist and who's co-chair of the group and head of clinical trials at the Dementia Research Centre. And obviously her area is of enormous interest to lots of people in terms of some of the developments that are going on. And so I'm handing over now to Cath, who's going to update us on her area of work. Thanks, Cath.
Thank you so much, Jacquie. I'm just going to share my screen and then I can get going. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. It's a fantastic number of people today that have made the efforts. That's brilliant. What I want to do in the next 10 minutes is give you a bit of an update on what's happening in treatment trials in Alzheimer's disease, including young onset. And what I can say for the start is there's a huge amount going on. It is the most exciting time in trials that I've ever been in. And I've been doing trials now for 14 years. So it really is changing things dramatically right now. And I hope to give you a flavour of that. So there are different types of drugs that we trial in Alzheimer's disease. And you will know well that the pathology in Alzheimer's disease involves abnormal buildup of proteins known as amyloid, known as tau, and inflammation that different proteins and inflammation in different ways. And two of the main ways are with immunotherapy, with producing antibodies against the problem, the proteins. That might be by giving an immunization, which is a regular infusion, or it might be by vaccinating someone, which is the sort of thing that we've had, all of us, most of us hopefully have had against COVID. Or we can use different processes that being produced in the first place. And gene silencing is one of those methods that is right now being used in Alzheimer's disease in early phase, which is incredibly exciting. It stops the disease course before it even begins. So thinking about the amyloid treatments that we have, a large number of the treatments we've been thinking about and using for a number of years have been these antibodies that we produce outside the body, we inject, and then they mop up different forms of the amyloid, the abnormal protein within the system, whether it's the monomers, the early soluble phases of amyloid, or whether it's the plaques which have built up in the brain. And you can see here, I've listed a number of drugs which are still in development. Some have fallen by the wayside, but there are a number that are still showing great promise. And one has even actually got further than just being in the trials, which I'm going to get to now. So you have to have been living off the planet to not have heard about aducanumab or Aduhelm. There's been a huge discussion and controversy about this drug since it started being studied. It started with very promising results in around 2015 in early studies, and then went through a very tortuous course where the studies that were then developed were stopped early because it was felt that they weren't effective. But in fact, when they looked at a larger data set, it turned out that there was some signal that at least one of those studies was effective. And long story short, after a lot of discussion, that drug was the first disease-modifying drug to be approved, at least conditionally, in June of this year. So I'm just going to say that again. We have the first drug that tries to change the course of disease in Alzheimer's disease approved this summer, and that's extraordinary. It's currently under consideration by the European equivalent authority and by the UK as to whether it'll be approved here, and we wait and see. What did it show? Well, in one of two studies, it showed a change in both cognitive and functional endpoints. In other words, it seemed to slow down the course of the disease to some degree, but in the second study, it didn't. In both of those studies, it showed a biological effect. It changed the amount of amyloid in the brain. It mopped it up and dropped the amount of amyloid that was in the brain. So it had a physical effect. It had some cognitive effect, but the results were controversial, but enough for it to have this conditional approval, and there will be more studies to look at that. What's encouraging is that there is now increasing support for those findings from similar drugs. So drugs that have been studied in a similar way against amyloid, again, antibodies, are lecanemab, gantenerumab, and donanemab, all of which are difficult to produce, by the way, and you'd spend at least a year trying to practice it before you get to this stage. They are all showing very similar effects with sufficient dose. So they all reduce the amyloid. They all seem to show a change in the rest of that disease process in the brain, which is really encouraging because it means it's not just dropping the protein. And they seem to show a modest change in the rate of cognitive decline. So all of these are still being studied in different populations, genetic and non-genetic Alzheimer's populations. But two of them, on the back of that aducanumab approval, are also filing for approval. So we may be in a situation in not so distant future of having several drugs to discuss that might change disease in clinic, which is incredible. Just briefly on donanemab, because I think that's a really exciting drug and study. This targets the pathological protein only. And the way the study was designed, they used a schedule, so they managed to drop the amount of amyloid using the drug to a certain level, which was virtually normal, and then stopped treating. So it's like taking Alzheimer's into remission, like you do with cancer, and then observing and making sure nothing comes back. And if it comes back, retreating. Nobody's done that before, and it would be a much more sustainable, affordable way of treating in the future. So it might be what we see in the future. The drug itself showed a really dramatic reduction in amyloid in the brain, in the plaque, and downstream effects as before, and slowing in cognitive decline. So again, ongoing studies, but very promising results. If you're going to give a drug that clears amyloid from the brain, you need to make sure that the benefits are greater than the risks. And this is a picture of someone who has the commonest adverse effect of these drugs, which is something known as ARIA-E, or basically it is focal brain swelling where the amyloid is being removed. It looks very dramatic, it sounds very dramatic, but in most people, it's asymptomatic. In most people, it only happens in the first 6 months of treatment, thereafter doesn't happen. And in most people, it resolves spontaneously. So it's something that we have to monitor very carefully. And it's something that if you do that correctly, it's manageable. I've had a number of patients who've had this sort of problem in trials, and they're absolutely fine. They have no symptoms all the way along the way, and it resolves itself. So important to know about, but not a reason not to have these drugs. So there's important evidence in these immunotherapy trials that we can make a difference to the disease, and that has some associated change in people's function. But that change is relatively modest. And so it may be that we need to think about giving treatments in combination with others. And so it's important we look at other areas. So tau is the second protein that becomes abnormal in Alzheimer's disease that we need to target. And as it builds up in the brain, you get an increase in cognitive symptoms. So it's a good target, perhaps slightly later in disease. And if we can suppress it, then we can maybe not only stop the spread of the tau, but also the effect it has on that amyloid. So there are several ways that we've been doing this. One is using a vaccination, again, like a COVID vaccine, an active vaccination that makes your body produce antibodies against tau. This is in early phases. There are 2 studies so far. One that's got slightly further, so far has shown it's safe, has shown that you get great antibody response from giving this vaccination, which is really exciting. And it's shown some change in the disease, but it's not yet shown any change on cognitive measures. It might be because the study was done in people, it turned out a third of them didn't actually have Alzheimer's disease. So they really need to focus on how this design goes moving forwards. There's lots to do. We're actually recruiting to a study that's similar in terms of being an active vaccination against tau right now. An alternative is, again, this passive antibody. So like against amyloid, you inject someone with antibodies made outside the body. And the idea is that they attach to this protein tau in the CNS, in the central nervous system, mop it up and prevent it spreading. So far, these drugs have been safe. One that's become most advanced, unfortunately, in the early phases of Alzheimer's disease was negative. It didn't show any effect. But in the later stage, or the moderate stages of Alzheimer's disease, the second study, Laureate, has shown a possibility of a positive result, but we need to see a lot more data to work out whether that is real and whether we need to go further with it. I mentioned gene silencing right at the beginning, and I've been involved in this particular study since 2017. I think it's one of the most exciting methods we use in all dementias, but we've been doing this in Alzheimer's disease since then. It's a gene silencing treatment that stops your own genetic makeup producing the tau protein. And it does that in a dosable way. So you can gradually reduce the amount of tau protein in your body, which reduces the spread of the disease. That's the aim anyway. And this study read out the top results of the first phase 1 safety study this summer. It was safe, which is a good start. But also it showed success, and this is the first drug that's done this, in reducing the tau levels in the central nervous system in a dose-related way. So that's really exciting, and we'll be going forwards into a later phase study in a lot more people very soon. We'll be recruiting to that study in the coming months. Finally, there will also be a gene silencing treatment against amyloid coming soon, specifically in young onset Alzheimer's disease patients. And I will be telling you more about this when I'm able to. It'll be in the next 3 to 6 months that we start this study. Again, it'll be an early study, but again, I think it's a very exciting opportunity. And last but not least, we also are trying to target inflammation, the third part of that triumvirate of abnormalities in Alzheimer's disease. And this is another antibody injected into the body, but this time, this one can actually increase the function that decreases inflammation in the brain. And the aim of that, therefore, is to decrease the speed of progression of the disease. We're currently doing a study looking at that. We wait to see what the results show, which we should get in the next year. So in conclusion, there's a lot going on. We have lots of evidence against amyloid with immunotherapy being able to clear the protein from the brain, so changing the disease, changing the course of the disease potentially, and some evidence of modest cognitive benefit. In tau, it's earlier days, but we have promising vaccines. We have some hints of other antibody treatments working, and some really exciting initial results on gene silencing. And again, it's early days against inflammation. But I hope you'll agree that there really is a massive change in what we're doing right now compared to a few years ago. We have the first disease-modifying drug, hopefully more to come very soon, and a real new era in treatments. So thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you to all of the fantastic team that work in trials, and of course to our participants and our study partners, who are the most important part of that team. Thank you.
Thank you, Cath. That all sounds so exciting. I think a lot of us were concerned that during the time of the pandemic that a lot of these things would be delayed. And so it's really thrilling to hear of so many positive things that seem to be emerging from the research. And, you know, we're really delighted to feel as though we've got that very direct feedback from you on these things that are happening. So thanks very much for that.
You're welcome.
We're going to move on now to the main theme for this afternoon, which is about the impact of a diagnosis of young onset Alzheimer's on family life. And the reason that the members of the group decided that that would be a good topic would be because there are so many stereotypes around Alzheimer's, and in particular, the idea that the person with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's is typically, somebody in their 80s maybe, who are being supported by family members who are themselves in later life. But many of you watching this afternoon and involved in the work of this group know that that's very far from the reality when we think about young onset Alzheimer's. And so we're going to explore that by looking at some of lived experience. And to begin with, I would like to introduce RDS members Sally Toomey and Joe Monaghan, who are mother and daughter. Sally's living with young onset Alzheimer's, and they're going to talk to us and share their experiences of what's happened as they've lived through it. So thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today with the wonderful Sally, who is living with young onset Alzheimer's, and her lovely daughter, Jo. Thank you both for coming along today.
Hi, Karen.
Yeah, hi. Lovely to see you. So let's start us off, Sally. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and when you were diagnosed?
Yeah, my name is Sally, obviously. I'm 63, have 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and a little dog. I was widowed in 2018, and in April 2021, I was actually diagnosed with the early onset Alzheimer's. I do still manage to live alone, which is great, but I have a little bit of help from Jo, my daughter, obviously. There's a few things that have happened along the way that I just didn't want to accept in the beginning, which everybody will go through. And then things have changed quite a bit, and I feel quite a lot more at ease with the situation.
Thank you, Sally. So today's theme is about family relationships. Can you tell us about your diagnosis and how it has impacted on your family relationships with your children and your grandchildren? Now, I understand you were only diagnosed earlier this year.
Yes, I think being diagnosed not long ago, it's been a bit of a rocky road because there was problems with medications and things, but that's different. But it was almost helpful to have those little hiccups, because then my children were able to sort of step up to the mark and help me out. But they are all very different. I've got one sitting next to me who's a helicopter mum and therefore a helicopter daughter. I've got a daughter who is incredibly helpful on finding information, and I've got a son who wants to go, I know nothing, I don't want to know anything. But he does get together when we have meetings and things. So yeah, it's been very different for all of them.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Sally. So Jo, tell us, helicopter mum, helicopter daughter.
Yeah, it's a phrase that I think my sister actually taught me when my children were young, which basically, if you've not heard of it before, it means that I'm a little bit overprotective and I kind of swoop in if they fall over and hurt themselves or if they've got a problem. And I know I'm a helicopter mum. Unfortunately for my mum, I had started to become a helicopter daughter. I think I just overreacted and rushed in to be overprotective of mum too soon, and she doesn't need that yet. And we're all learning as we go along, and I'm learning to back off a little bit. She's still okay. She's still very independent, still make her own decisions. So I'm guilty of being a helicopter.
But on the other hand, there will come a time later when I'll be really glad that she's a helicopter daughter. So
there's a time and a place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you both. So Sally, how did you handle it when Jo was being that sort of helicopter, as you say, daughter?
I've got a wonderful relationship with her where I can just say to her, stop it. I'm not having it. I'm not advanced enough to need that sort of help. And yeah, we came to a mutual understanding led by me. So it was good. I mean, it's just about talking. It's just about realizing that still in an early stage, it's going to change. We know it's going to change. but please don't just treat me like as if I'm 5 now all of a sudden, because there's no need. I'm fine at the moment.
So what kind of situation has been difficult for you as a family?
We have recently stumbled across a slight problem that I feel like I created, really. WhatsApp chats are wonderful, and WhatsApp groups are wonderful. And we have one with my siblings, myself and mum, but we also have one just myself and my 2 siblings. So in the interest of trying to just keep them up to date and share information, I was using the one with just the 3 of us and mum not in that group. And we strayed too far with that information sharing. And last week, the week before, I can't remember, a scenario arose where we chatted about something and we kind of went into decision making, but it wasn't our place to make those decisions without mum being there. And we took it too far too soon, and we have learned.
Sally, how did you feel about that?
I was quite upset. I just felt that they were taking decisions out of my hands, and I'm able to make my own decisions still. If I needed help, I'd ask. And so I was a little bit upset with them all. I think we've kind of moved along now, and Joe and I are kind of guilty of a little bit of not telling the others yet, because we've arranged a meeting with them on Saturday. We have regular meetings anyway, but this one I think is so as then I can get the point across to all of them equally and just say, back off a little bit, it's just not that time yet. So kind of that way around.
Thank you. No, that sounds like a really good plan. So Sally, who found your diagnosis the most difficult to deal with?
I think that would be my son. He was basically, I don't want to know, just tell me what I've got to do, but I don't want to know. Didn't want to take it on board. He actually didn't want to tell the children.
So how did you resolve that issue?
I had a chat with him because the younger grandchildren, they knew, that's from the other 2 children's families, they knew, and we were going to get together for his birthday. And I just thought, if one of them lets it slip, it's not nice. So I talked it over with him, and he said, yep, I agree, I'll have a word. And he did, and everything was fine. I mean, when I got to the birthday party, she came up, gave me a big cuddle, and it was good. It was really good. So it pays to talk.
Yeah, so it all worked out in the end. And you know, it's really tricky with all families, you know, having different views on telling young children and grandchildren. And I've supported many families over the years, and it's been amazing to see how young children adapt to a family member with dementia. So I'm really pleased that all worked out so well for you. Do you feel supported or sometimes over-supported by your family, Sally?
I think in the beginning, probably over-supported, definitely. We all talked it through, we've all bashed it about and came up with quite a good balance now, I think. So I think going forward, I'm hoping it'll continue in that way. So yeah, I think we have learned and we've agreed and resolved to make sure that we involve mum in communications and definitely let her make her own decisions. And we're just going to keep learning as we go forward, really, together.
That's lovely to hear. So one final question. Do you have any advice for others who may be struggling with family dynamics?
Yeah, I think we do, don't we, really? I think the main thing is to remember that it is hard and it is scary, but you need to keep communications open and you need to be able to voice your opinions and your ideas, but you also need to listen. Don't take that power away from the person who is coping with and dealing with that dementia, especially in the early days. I personally would advise that family members and friends, if necessary, but family members go out and do some learning, do some research, some reading. It doesn't just have to be the adults either. I am a very strong believer that you tell your children on their own level and you include them. I found a lovely book, Grandma's Got Dementia, I think it's called, and that was great for my kids. But really try to increase your understanding, because that will make the journey easier, a lot easier. Also recognise that everybody in the family is involved, and everybody in the family will need support in different ways at different points in time. That's really important as well. Just keep talking, keep listening to each other.
I think it's we're all different. Every one of us are different, and just take that on board as well.
Such a big thank you to you both for sharing with me so honestly today. Every family is wonderfully unique. I hope that by sharing your stories today, you'll help other families navigate their own way as they support their own family member living with young onset Alzheimer's disease. We will make sure that we send out a couple of links about the books that you can get. I think there's Grandma, It's Me, and I think there's another couple as well, helping explain to young children about a family member having dementia. And lastly, I just want to say, Sally and Joe will be at the Q&A later on in the webinar, so you'll be able to ask them some questions directly. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to thank Sally and Joe, because that was such a lovely and clear description of how the dynamics change and how you need to learn how to handle those changes in relationships over time, and that those changes themselves change over time. And the points that they made and the advice that they made about how to resolve issues with learning, with sharing decisions, and with communication and understanding was just incredibly well made. So I really thank you for that. We now have another couple to talk to us about their lived experience. And that's our very own Jacquie, who is chairing the meeting today and is my co-chair. And her son, who is also joining us, Ben Wadling. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking the time. I know that you have to take time out of a very busy day, so we really appreciate it.
No problem.
And just without further ado, I will hand over to you, because you're going to talk to us about what it's like to care for a parent with young onset Alzheimer's disease. Thank you.
Thanks, Cath. And thanks very much indeed for Ben, who's sprinted in from, as Cath said, from a busy day at the office to join us this afternoon. And thinking about it, you were around 16 when Tony first showed symptoms of some form of dementia or something being wrong. And you were 22 when he was finally diagnosed. And then you were 31 when he died. Can you remember when you first realised that things weren't all well?
No, I don't remember it being anywhere near like my teens. Like, to be honest, I didn't really I didn't really have a hunch it was Alzheimer's until he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So I remember you were saying, oh, he was having memory issues, and then so I remember, because I was at university at the time, and so I remember like Googling loads of like things of, oh, what can cause memory issues. And I remember seeing something like, oh, stress. If you're stressed, it can affect your memory. And so I remember calling you and saying, oh, I don't think it is anything bad. I think it's just stress, and that's. And then, but no, I don't remember like. I didn't have like a gut feeling that something was seriously wrong until he was actually diagnosed.
Well, I think that's very understandable in lots of ways, because I think the reason it took such a long time for Tony to receive a diagnosis was because at that time, doctors seemed to be sort of more inclined to think about things like midlife crisis and other reasons why Tony might be unwell, rather than looking at the issue of dementia. So maybe things have changed quite a bit over the time since we lived through that. And we'd already had experience of living with dementia because of your experience with Tony's mum, Nana Edie, who had vascular dementia. But she was in her 80s, so that was very different. I mean, did that strike you at the time, how different it was?
No, not at all. I mean, I sort of, because I was still at primary school when she passed away, so I mean, I never really, it was too complex to sort of for me to have any sort of understanding that she was coping with dementia. It just seemed like an old person that unfortunately was sort of, I more assumed she sort of died of old age at the time, but then no, I had my knowledge of dementia at the time when he was diagnosed was nothing really. I had to Wikipedia it, and then that's when I thought, oh God, it's terminal. Because I found out that it was terminal on Wikipedia. So it was like my knowledge of it was as little as that at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an important point, isn't it? Because I think that, you know, for a lot of people, you know, Joe earlier was talking about the importance of being well prepared and, you know, finding out and, you know, researching these things in order to be able to cope with things a little bit better. In retrospect, I feel bad about the way I handled telling you about the diagnosis. You know, I thought that you were more aware of what the likely outcome was, and you were away at university, but you told me afterwards that that wasn't the case and that you didn't realise. No,
not at all. No, I remember we went to the day I found out he was diagnosed, went to a musical in the evening, didn't we? And then and you told, I can't remember, you and Dad were somewhere else when I found out, and then me and Sam came to meet you at the theatre, and I remember it was I can't remember what musical it was, but it was I don't know, I wasn't really focusing too much on the musical to us, but yeah. No, I mean, I don't remember you dealing, I don't remember you telling me in a way. But
you said it was Nana who told you.
My memory was that it was Nana that told me, not you anyway. But
I think the truth of it was that we were all in a state of shock at the time, really. And I think that, you know, it was confusion around the whole thing, wasn't it? I mean, thinking about that and those sort of feelings, did you get any support from anywhere? I mean, we did start talking about it a bit as a family, but, you know, again, thinking about the conversation between Joe and Sally, that I think that we all felt that we needed to take our lead from Tony. And Tony really, really didn't want to talk about it very much, I think, did he? I think that he very much preferred to sort of take one day at a time. And I think that we were very much led by that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, support-wise, it was mainly from, I think we all just more kept the support sort of for each other, really, didn't we? I mean, I don't really, you get your support from friends, but it's not like, again, because they don't really know much about dementia or nobody really had any experience of Alzheimer's from friends. It's more just sort of like general good wishes rather than any sort of like in-depth support. Yeah.
For sure, yeah. I think people didn't really know how to cope with it. And, you know, there's that point when a lot of people who were part of our friendship group couldn't really cope with it and dropped out anyway, you know, so friends of Tony's anyway. And then when you finish university, you move back home and you made a decision that you wanted to stay as close to the situation and spend as much time with Dad as you possibly could. And I was worried about that because I worried about your future.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I don't know. It never really seemed like, you say like I made a choice. It never really seemed as much of a choice, just because it felt like, I don't know. I mean, again, I just sort of always saw it more as you were sort of given like a warning sign that, you know, you've been given a warning that he's not going to be around maybe as long as I thought he was going to be. And so then from the diagnosis, it was just sort of a case of then wanting to cram as much, you know, use that time as wisely as possible and sort of spend as much time with him as possible. And so, I don't know, it never really seemed like a choice of, because I was just finishing university, but I don't know, it was never a choice of I'll get the diagnosis and then I'm off traveling for a year or anything. Let me know how it gets on. And so yeah, it wasn't ever really a choice.
You just felt that was what you wanted to do. I mean, I felt that.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I think want is the right word. I didn't feel like I had to do it. Like I didn't feel like I was. It didn't feel like a burden, or I didn't feel I didn't live every day like I was making a great sacrifice. I think I wanted to spend as much time as possible.
Your brother Sam, he was a bit older and he was living locally, but he wasn't at home. Do you think he coped with it differently from you?
Yeah, I mean, he still had another year at university to go as well, didn't he? So I mean, that first year after the diagnosis, he was away. And so for that, there was a period of when I finished that it was just because you were retiring in the winter, weren't you, or in the autumn?
I decided to give up work because it wasn't viable anymore. And
then so there was a time in that summer where it was me and Dad in the house as well, and I think that was quite I think that was maybe quite a good period for me and him to have together to sort of maybe get my head around what our new normal was going to be and how we were going to communicate with each other and how our relationship was going to be going forward. Whereas Sam, I don't know, I think he found it much more difficult to deal with, and I think he definitely preferred to keep a bit of a distance from it. Like he was never, even as Dad progressed, he sort of, I don't know, he was, again, I don't think, he didn't love Dad any less, but he sort of just more dealt with it in a, like like he used to do his little things with him and he'd take him out for a day, like a trip to the pub or anything, but he would never,
What do you think were the toughest parts as things progressed?
Toughest parts? It's tricky because again, it's sort of like you sort of forget I generally look back at it as the sort of the best 10 years of our relationship in a weird way. But then, I don't know, I'm sure there were...
Why do you say that?
I don't know, I just think it's the 10 years that we were the closest and sort of I don't know.
You were close, weren't you, in spite of everything? Did the experience of being carers affect us as a family, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's quite a strange situation to go through, isn't it, really? To go through together.
Quite a profound one, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it brought us closer. But then, yeah, it's like, I don't know. I mean, you just sort of forget the day-to-day struggles a bit.
Yeah.
But there were tough times. I mean, the changing was a bit of a disaster.
Some of the battles.
Some of the nappy changing was patience testing. But it was sort of...
But we did have lots of fun, didn't we? I mean, I can remember, there was... And I mean, one thing about it, as I say, I mean, I in some ways felt bad that you were maybe missing out on the opportunities to do other things. But at the same time, the fact is that we wouldn't have been able to keep Tony at home as long as we did. Right, in fact, right up to the end, if it hadn't been for the fact that we were a double act, because it was, that wouldn't have worked out.
No.
I mean, Tony died very peacefully 20 months ago, just before the pandemic. And since then, you've become a father yourself. Do you think that, what's the legacy of living with young onset Alzheimer's? Is that too hard? He was so lucky to have you. I think we need to sign out before we crack up completely.
Thank you both. It's so moving to hear you and to hear you share so openly those stories. So thank you for sharing those with us. And we can see how powerful your relationships were and still are. And that then you said that was best 10 years of your relationship is such a testament to the relationship that you had between the two of you and how those 10 years worked. So I'm not going to say any more, just because I think that your words speak much better than mine do. But thank you both very much for sharing that with us. I'm going to now introduce Emma to you. So Emma Harding is a clinical psychologist and research fellow at UCL. And she is absolutely invaluable in our psychological therapy team, as well as wearing many hats in the Rare Dementia Support Network. She's a fantastic colleague as well. So I'm going to introduce her now to talk about psychological support for the family.
Hello everyone, I'm Emma Harding and I'm a research fellow with a background in psychology, and I'm based at the Dementia Research Centre at UCL. And I'm really pleased to have been asked to speak to you today about some of the psychological impacts of young onset Alzheimer's disease from a family perspective and some of the possible ways of accessing support. So when we talk about psychological impacts, we mean how the diagnosis might impact how we think, feel and behave. And importantly, we know that a diagnosis of YOAD doesn't just affect the person given the diagnosis, but it also affects others around them too. So today we'll be thinking particularly about what some of those impacts can be and the support available to help. So we know from research that people with a diagnosis of young onset Alzheimer's disease themselves might experience depression, anxiety, apathy, so a loss of interest in doing things, an impact on their self-esteem, on their sense of identity, often having a sense of loss of independence and control, and that can sometimes overlap quite a lot with stopping driving potentially, and any work-related challenges and changes. And this is also just to say that this is the research literature, so we know some of these experiences are quite common, but obviously every individual and family is different. So some of this might resonate with your experience and some of it might not. And we know from research with partners or carers of people with a diagnosis of YOAD that they can feel similarly depression, anxiety, stress, a sense of increased responsibilities, relationship changes, worries about the future, feelings of guilt and grief, and often frustration at times as well. And then we know from research with adult children who have a parent with YOAD that they might experience changes in the sense of roles and responsibilities within the family. They might have feelings of needing to protect both parents, but in different ways potentially. And they might struggle to manage their own milestones within that picture. So whether that's moving out of the family home and living independently, or thinking about family planning for themselves. So different members of the family might be impacted in different ways. And of course, there are other members of the family we haven't talked about here, like elderly parents or grandchildren, who all may also be impacted by the diagnosis. And it's important as well to say that family means different things to different people, and we're very conscious of that. And families, as I'm sure many of us can relate to, can be complicated even at the best of times. The family system itself has often been shaped over years and years, and there are all sorts of established roles and responsibilities and relationships that when a diagnosis like YOAD is made, might all need to be kind of renegotiated, reconfigured. And families are also interdependent. So each person in the family can impact the others, but also each individual is different. So two children in the same family might react very differently and have very different ways of coping with the changes that a diagnosis like this can bring. I think it's also important just to recognise as well, though, that although there are lots of differences in experience across the family, and that brings its own complications, there are also a lot of similarities. So things that everyone might be feeling in slightly different ways, like a sense of loss, frustration, worries about the future and guilt. They might be affecting everyone in one way or another. So we are really talking about a shared experience, in the sense that this is a situation that no one would have chosen. It's nobody's fault, and everyone is having to make adjustments all the time as things go along. And it's also good to remember and remind ourselves, I think, that in lots of ways, families are very resourceful as well. So in the same way that everyone copes and responds very differently, that also means there's lots of different skills being brought to the table. Maybe you recognise in your own family that there's a designated problem solver, a person you can offload to. Families often have a long history of caring about each other and coping with various life challenges together, which are all resources that can be brought to this new challenge as well. Having said that, that's not to downplay that it can be hard. Of course, it is hard at times, and while at the moment we can't cure the condition, I suppose I want to encourage you that those feelings of anxiety, stress, frustration, or sadness, or unhelpful thoughts are things that we can do something about. So they're totally natural thoughts and feelings to be having, a very reasonable response to the situation, but different sorts of psychological support can just help you to manage those differently, if you want to, so that you can feel more able to cope with them. And psychological support has a good evidence base, and it's proven to work. So that's really encouraging, and I hope to instill a bit of hope about that today, and the potential of psychological support. But you do need to be willing to give it a go, and it needs to be the right time and the right format for you. So we know different members of different families will be ready for different sorts of input at different times. So it is important to remember that. So it's not necessarily about what we can do to change the overall situation, but about what we can change to make living with that situation easier, and about giving you some tools for your toolbox so that you're in the best position to look after yourselves and also to look after each other when you might be having a particular down day, or you find yourself going down a bit of a spiral of negative thinking, or notice that you're just feeling really tense and stressed. So I'm just going to whiz through some different options, which you may already be familiar with or have engaged with. So there's psychoeducation, which is really about learning about your symptoms or the difficulties so that you can better understand them and cope with them. So for example, if you're someone who feels very anxious, just learning about what is happening in your body when you feel anxious and how you can manage that, it can be really helpful and actually help to alleviate some of that anxiety, just the knowledge. And similarly, better understanding the symptoms of the diagnosis can be really helpful for alleviating some of the stresses and frustrations that can come from not really understanding what's going on or why you might be struggling with something. Peer support is obviously something that we really value here at RDS, and lots of people find very helpful to get that kind of knowing emotional support. So from other people who know something of what you're going through and can really relate on a personal level. Counselling is something some of you may have accessed or be familiar with, where you can talk to someone who is objective and non-judgmental, and they'll create just a safe space for you to just work through your feelings, talk about them with someone who's not involved in your day-to-day life, which can really help to bring some clarity and just make sense of some of those feelings which can feel very overwhelming or conflicting. Cognitive behavioural therapy is one type of therapy you may have heard quite a lot about. It's often offered on the NHS as a first port of call, and it's really about understanding how your thoughts, feelings and behaviours all relate to each other, and that they can all feed back to each other in both directions. And then you can work on changing some of those, trying out changing some of them and seeing the wider impacts that can have. Another type of therapy is acceptance and commitment therapy, and this focuses not so much on changing your thoughts and feelings, but learning to be okay with them being there and you carrying on anyway to do the things that matter to you. So as if they're annoying passengers on the bus that may be chattering away, but you learn to keep driving the bus anyway, and you carry on to your destination and do the things that you want to do, and you're just able to just let them be there without needing to change them. And it's also important to mention self-help, I guess. So lots of these types of therapy now, there are different ways you can do kind of guided self-help if you would prefer to do it on your own terms, be a bit more flexible. That can be a really useful avenue to pursue as well. And there are lots of other types of therapy as well that have different feels. This is just a small taster, but do reach out to us if you want any help with accessing psychological support, and we'll be very happy to talk more about what the different options might be. So in terms of accessing, the NHS offers a range of talking therapies via its IAPT scheme, which is improving access to psychological therapies. And you can access that via your GP, or you can also self-refer. There are also some charities and other support organisations who offer some free short courses of counselling, for example. So local carers organisations often do that, and some local minds also do that. And your GP can also signpost you to local services, so always good to check in with them. The RDS Direct Support team, of course, can do signposting as well, and they have great resources for children, all sorts of resources, so anything you need, and any member of the family is always welcome to reach out and contact and become a member of RDS, and we really encourage that. If it's an option that's possible for you, there's also the option of private therapy, and that gives you a bit more flexibility about the type of approach you want. And there are a couple of organisations here, Counselling Directory and the British Psychological Society, that actually list their practitioners who have experience in dementia, in case you want to speak to a therapist who knows something about that already. That's all from me today, and I've just put the RDS Direct Support team contact address on the screen now, so do reach out between meetings if you need any one-to-one support, or if you want to follow up about anything from today in particular. My email address is also up there, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Emma. That's really helpful and thorough, and I think it was fascinating for me how the research topics that you had talked about really match some of the themes that came up in the lived experience sessions this afternoon. I'm going to hand over now to Karen again, and Karen is going to talk about the peer support network, which is being developed alongside these meetings of the group. So over now to Kath. Sorry, Karen, sorry.
No, don't worry. Thank you very much, Jackie. And in fact, it ties nicely into what Emma was talking about, the importance of that peer support. So I just wanted to spend a few moments to update you on the fact that we launched our first YOAD, so that's Young Onset Alzheimer's Disease Peer Support Group this month. So on the 6th of October, we had our first meeting. It was a huge success. It was an absolute delight and a privilege to facilitate the support group with Nikki Zimmermann, our direct support lead. It was lovely listening to everybody sharing their stories, beginning to make those important connections with others, listening to them chatting to each other and laughing, and really just generally having a great time. So it was fantastic. We've got more referrals in. We're going to be running the group on a monthly basis. So it's going to be on the first Wednesday morning of every month. And we run it for about 90 minutes and it starts at 11 a.m. So it's so very special to be part of this YOAD peer support group. Members attend from all over the United Kingdom. And it just makes me think about how important communities are to all of us, for us to find that connection with people that understand, you know, some of the difficulties that you all may be experiencing living with a young onset Alzheimer's disease. And to me, that makes the groups even more special. So I guess what you need to know is how do you access that group? Well, if you're living with young onset Alzheimer's disease and you're a member of RDS, because that's the criteria, just email us at the contact@raredementiasupport.org and we'll make sure you get an invite to the meeting. Now, we run the meetings via Zoom. So if you need any support accessing that, please do get a family member to do that. And then once you've linked into the meeting, then the meeting's just for you on your own, living with young onset. If you live alone and you need support with IT, someone in the direct support team can actually just do a test run with you just to make sure that you can use it and get into the meeting. So don't have that as a barrier as not to join us. So the next meeting, if you're living with young onset Alzheimer's, is on the 3rd of November. But before I hand back to Seb for the Q&A, I just want to say we've got more exciting news. And that is we're launching a YOAD carers peer support group. Same model, about making friends, you know, those connections, being with other carers, supporting family members living with young onset Alzheimer's disease, creating your own community. So that's going to be monthly as well. And we're launching that on the 24th of November. And that will be at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and that will be for 90 minutes. So it's the same criteria. If you're caring for somebody and you're a member of RDS, do email us at the contact@ email address. We'll make sure that comes out in the literature after this webinar. And we'll make sure you get an invitation to the group. And we look forward to welcoming you to that carers peer support group, which will be on the 24th of November. So exciting times, 2 new groups, and I look forward to updating you on those in the future. So I'll just hand back to Seb now for the Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. And for those of you I've not had the pleasure of meeting yet, hi, my name's Seb. I'm one of the psychologists at Rare Dementia Support. So while please everyone who's on the panel, do feel free to turn on your cameras. And as you do, I was just going to read out a couple of comments which people have kindly shared in the chat, and particular admiration for Sally and Joe and Jackie and Ben. People saying you are both truly amazing. And talking about Sally and Joe saying you inspirationally open. I wish my family had been so good at communication, which I think is absolutely the right affirmation, and also perhaps an encouragement for us to share with people and link in with tips on how to communicate with family members, which is absolutely a struggle and a dilemma that many people face. And also for Jackie and Ben, someone who said, wow, from the heart, what a fantastic team you were and are. Thank you for sharing your story. You're truly inspirational. So I hope you feel the love, everybody, of everyone on this webinar. We're sorry we're not with you in person, but we are lucky to have some questions. So we would normally be able people to voice their questions for themselves, but I'm afraid if you don't mind me being the mouthpiece for today, I will try and share some of the queries that have come in from people who've been listening to you all. So I thought we'd kick off with this one. Somebody has asked, what are people's experiences of using day centres? Are these reopening following the restrictions, and what have been the sort of benefits, pros and cons of them? I wondered if either Sally and Joe or Jackie and Ben might be willing to start with that one, because I guess the broader theme of the question is around day centres and how they can provide a valuable part of people's everyday life. Jackie?
I think looking at it as part of the bigger picture, one of the things that is an issue for anybody who's involved in young onset Alzheimer's would be finding appropriate support. And there was one day centre where I took Tony, and everybody there was so much older than himself. In actual fact, he was probably further down his dementia journey than some of them were. They were sitting doing crosswords and word searches and things, which were quite beyond him at that time. And I think that actually added to his distress, seeing that there were people who were in. So we abandoned it for a while, but a little bit later, he went to another place local to us, and a big penny dropped for me, which was that though a lot of the clients in the terminology were older people, the staff were young, and there were some quite sort of young people who Tony really engaged with who were carers. What do you think? I mean, did you get a sense of that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't the greatest mixer, was he? I mean, he used to keep himself to himself a bit, which was always quite sad, because you'd go in and he was sort of, I don't know, just sort of slightly sitting in the corner. And you sort of, I don't know, I used to feel, that was probably when I felt the most guilty of sort of leaving, sort of feeling like sort of you were sort of giving yourself a bit of a break, but leaving him sort of unoccupied for a few hours.
But he did enjoy it. There was one afternoon when they had music, and you know, quite lively music. I was quite surprised, actually. Sort of this day centre turned into a kind of clubbing atmosphere for the afternoon, and so he did develop relationships with you know, some of the people there. So I think that it varies according to the stage. It varies according to the environment, and what you think looking at it might be appropriate or suitable actually might not be how the person with dementia responds to it. You know, I think I was much more sort of looking at the environment and whether there were sort of pretty pictures on the wall and things, and actually those weren't the things that mattered so much to Tony, that he you know, there were a couple of young guys, weren't there, at Hollybourne, who he really kind of hit it off with, and they had a bit of a larky relationship and so on. And the fact that he went on Wednesday, which was Fish and Chips Day, you know, meant that he actually enjoyed it. So, you know, my advice would be look beyond the obvious, and that what's not appropriate now might be very different in 6 months' time. So don't close your mind to anything, I think. And also, those places, they don't just support the individual, they support the family as well. And, you know, we had some quite good fun and so on as part of that, as an experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jackie. It's really, really helpful. Sally and Joe, I wondered if you had any thoughts on this about either use of companies or activity organisations, or whether that's something you're just thinking about for the future.
I think it's still early days really, but we're I can't remember the name of the place now, where David Garland is.
King's Care is a local organisation.
Yeah, they we've heard good things about King's Care, so it's offering all sorts of different things down there. So I think that's something that we're in the middle of exploring, because they do walking as well, and you know, sort of different groups. There's loads out there. I think it's just waiting for the time to be right for yourself. A bit like Jackie was just saying, you know, we were told by somebody else whose husband goes to the King's Care group, if you're offered something, don't say no, say yes, because you can always change your mind afterwards. And so we've kind of tried that a little bit, and it's very true. It's very true. There's a couple of things that I think we found have been really interesting, and there's a couple of things that I think I would think too early. So it is down to timing, I think, and how you're feeling at that time. So yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and that encouragement for other people to try, and maybe to try more than once, but not to feel kind of obliged, is really helpful, I think. And Karen, I don't know if you know or have any recent experience for anyone you're supporting at the moment about whether day centres are opening up and returning to sort of full action after the pandemic.
Thank you, Seb. I think it's different all over the country, actually. Some places they've been open for a few months, others are taking things a bit slower. I think the most important thing I would say is make sure that you are sort of in contact with those local service providers, whether that's the Alzheimer's Society or whatever dementia commission services in the area, because it can be different depending on where you are in the country, and finding out from them what's open. And also just be a bit open-minded, because daycare can look really different. You know, in certain areas of the country, there's some great projects running where daycares actually run out of people's homes, you know, with a host. So you're not going into that community setting. And And it's recognizing that it can be different. As Jacquie said, I thought that was a fabulous answer. It's no matter, it'll be different for different parts of the journey, and it'll be different for those individuals as well. So thank you, Seb.
Great, thank you all. The next couple of questions we've had are for Sally, if that's okay. One person in the audience was asking, how long did it take you to get a diagnosis that was helpful to you?
Unfortunately, I started with the GP, and then no sooner had I started and the letter came saying, oh, you're going to come to the hospital for a memory clinic, etc., we went into lockdown. So the journey was a lot longer, I think, than it would have ordinarily been, because then we had somebody that did a few things with us or with me. And then we went into another lockdown. So it was quite a slow process. I have a friend, funnily enough, they're in a different area, but her journey has just been about 3 months, whereas mine really was, months and months and months and months. So I can't really answer 100%.
No, that's a great answer there. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people on the call who similarly have had things disturbed by the pandemic. I think on average, some other people on the call might know better than I do, but I think the stats are slightly sobering in that I think most diagnoses of dementia on average take around a couple of years, whereas for younger people, the statistics suggest it may be up to 4 years on average for people to get their diagnosis and for things to become clearer. So if that's you, if you're listening into this and you're in the midst of that process or haven't found sort of resolution, then our hearts are very much with you, because we know it can be a slow and arduous process. The other question, Sally, that came through for you, if you don't mind asking, please don't feel obliged to, but we're among friends here, is about medication and whether you're on any medication and whether you found anything that's helpful.
I was originally put on donepezil. It seemed at first to be the drug from hell because there were so many side effects. But I was determined to stick with it because my mother had Alzheimer's as well. And she actually put up with it for about 3 weeks. She said, I'm not taking it anymore, it's horrible. So I stuck with it and overcame literally all of the side effects until about 2 months ago, when I had quite a big side effect and they said, stop it now. I was a little bit perturbed at having to stop it because it was helping. It really was helping. It's got to come out of my system completely, which I think it is now. So they're almost ready to put me back onto another drug that I have no idea about. I can't even remember what they said it was called. But if you're offered, take it, try it. Don't just walk away and say, I don't think it's going to be for me, because like I say, it really was helping, and I was quite disappointed to have to come off of it because another side effect cropped up that you just couldn't take it with. So give it a go.
Thank you. That's a really encouraging and open-minded answer. That's great. Cath, I don't know if you want to make any comments for people. Obviously, you've worked with lots of people who have been trying different medications and trying to taper and adjust timings and things to suit them.
I think Sally has just really clearly articulated what it's like to start one of these medicines. It's exactly right, Sally. You start it and all the side effects happen right at the beginning. And then hopefully, usually they gradually reduce and the benefits actually take time. So you start with the side effects and you finish with the benefits, and it takes that time to get to them. The good news is that if one drug doesn't suit you and you do end up having problems taking it, like you did then with donepezil, there are 2 other drugs that work in a very similar way that are equally effective, but that have a different range of side effects. So if one doesn't suit you, another one may well. And it's always worth trying them. And Sally, as you said, if you don't try it, you won't know. And if you try it and it doesn't suit you, then you can always stop it. But if you don't try it, you won't know. So I think you made a really good point, Sally.
Absolutely. Jacquie.
Yes, I'm just in terms of that whole business about whether to take it or not. I think the protocol around the prescription of donepezil has changed. At one point, you had to be further down the line before you were prescribed it. It's more common now to have it prescribed at the point of diagnosis. But, you know, for what it's worth, when Tony began taking it, he said categorically that he felt as though the fog had cleared. And, you know, I think that that was well worth it. And it probably helped him for about 18 months, I think, something like that. But, you know, I thought that that idea of the fog clearing was just such a lovely, powerful image, and that he really, really did feel the benefits of it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jacquie. And Cath?
Just to come back to that point, Jacquie, that is the exact phrase that I say to people: if this helps you, it may well clear the fog. And that's because so many people have used that phrase as and I can see Sally's nodding as well. That does seem to be how, if it does help people, that's how it helps. Just one other thing to say. Firstly, yes, you're absolutely right that the rules changed a little while back. So it can be given earlier, and I and others tend to give it as early as we can. It is only a symptom control treatment, but it does give some people significant benefit. And then just to add that there is a second drug that we can add in later on that with some people gives an additional boost. And finally, just back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that we are now starting to see and have conversations about what might be happening in the next few years, which is a new part of this whole discussion that we all need to learn about, and we'll be learning with you.
Absolutely. The only other comment I was going to make is that lots of people have also stuck in that quandary of they're taking something and they don't know if it's doing them any good. And the fog analogy, I think, is equally true there, that, for example, people who are unsure if this is working for me, you know, it doesn't give me any side effects, but I don't know if it's helping. And then, you know, life happens, and perhaps they run out of medication for a couple of days, and suddenly they do notice the difference between a clear day and a foggier day. We realise these aren't miracle cures, but helpful for some. So thank you for those answers. Just another comment that's come in, someone saying, my husband is on 2 medications, but I've never seen an improvement. He's been on them for 3 years, and I wonder if there's any point in him continuing. Cath, I know it relates to what you were just saying, but I wonder if you might just pick up on that before we move on to another topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So some people do have this clearance and some fog and clarity of thought. Some people don't notice a difference. And what I say to those people is, if you haven't got side effects, it may be slowing down the progression of your symptoms. And we know from studies that have been done that it is the case that people, if they're not on these drugs, tend to have progression of their symptoms that is more than if you are on the drugs. So you might still be progressing, therefore you don't notice that you're on the drug, but you might be progressing more slowly. So if it suits you, it doesn't cause you problems, I tend to recommend that people continue it for as long as they're comfortable to do so.
Great, thank you all for that. The next question was triggered by Sally and Joe's talk, but I think very much relates to Jacquie and Ben as well, or to all of us, I think, which is really about decision making and the sort of the pros and cons of it. And the person in particular was saying, listening to Sally and Joe talking, does taking decisions not reduce anxiety on the part of the person living with the diagnosis? That's my experience of looking after my sister. And I wondered if you I realize every situation is different and every decision is different. And you will explain very clearly how it's about a matter of negotiation and knowing one another and trusting relationships and adaptation over time. But I was curious to know if you maybe could think of examples of decisions which you've made and have been helpful or relieved anxiety, and others which perhaps maybe haven't worked quite as you thought. Please go ahead.
I think at the moment, though, it might help relieve anxiety to be part of the decision making, but what we found was it was almost like stealing the power. It's too early to think about, well, am I relieving anxiety, or am I actually just taking away any choices they've got for themselves? And it did just feel like I was kind of just stealing Mum's thunder and taking away any power that she had still in her grasp, really. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I can still make a lot of decisions, and sometimes I'll do them without even consulting Joe. But there are times when I feel that the family need to get together to talk about the decisions, and that's when it becomes easier. Like the times that we have talked about things like power of attorney and things, it's been easier than me having to sit there worrying about all of it. So yes, sharing it is good. Having somebody else to also then take away a little bit of that pressure is also good. So I think it's individual, and there's no right and wrong.
Yeah.
I really think that's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah.
Just before I come to Jacquie and Ben, I was also just curious, because you've spoken a couple of times about sort of arranging meetings or having time. I just wonder if that says something about the circumstances, the situation in which you're making those decisions. I guess as with all of life, if you're trying to make decisions rapidly or with lots of other pressures on each of your times, then it's perhaps harder. Whereas if you're able to do these moments where you set aside time to talk together, perhaps without some of the distractions of children or other responsibilities, then maybe that's what you're seeing the benefits of.
Definitely, because we've actually removed the children from the areas and said that you all stay out the way or don't come at all, stay at home. And it's been easier to talk. It's more free flowing. You feel more relaxed when you haven't got the bad bits around you, the kids running in and out. Oh, the telly's broke. Oh, this is working. Oh, she did this, he did. Easier without all of those distractions. And yet we haven't always immediately come to a decision, but we have been able to talk about them openly and honestly, which was something that I asked for right from the beginning. And so far, it's going okay. But obviously, we had the little blips along the way. But yeah, I think you're right.
Great, thank you. I was going to come to Jacquie and Ben yet, but I realize, Karen, you may have also some examples in a moment of kind of decisions you've helped people through, or sometimes those thorny decisions that can't be made in one moment, but take time to evolve or for people to get comfortable with. But Jacquie and Ben first.
One thing I recall, when we talk about decisions, there's big decisions like sort of the power of attorney type decisions, and there's medical decisions, should we take this drug or whatever. But there's also decisions like, what should we have for dinner, or should we go and see somebody tomorrow? And in the early stages, I found it the other day, I got a book and I wrote in big letters on the front of it, Our Decisions Book. And when we'd had a conversation and decided something, I would write in it what we talked about and what the decision was. Because Tony sometimes forgot that we'd had the conversation. And then when I said we're going to do something or we decided this, do you remember that?
Yeah, I forgot about it.
Yeah, he would get very angry and he'd say, well, you're always so bossy, you're always making these decisions, you're making decisions on my behalf, and I didn't know anything about that. And that was very upsetting because I didn't like him to be thinking that, but equally, it was very distressing for him to think that he had no agency, that he couldn't make decisions anymore. So, top tip, get a decisions book, sort of sometimes for decisions great and small, that sort of actually to sort of say, on this day, we talked about this and we decided that we would like to do this, or we decided that we're going to make this change, or it was quite, Tony used to write his name by the decisions, to sort of say, yes, I remember this. And I'd forgotten all about it until sort of hearing sort of Sally and Joe and talking about those sort of family discussions, that sort of actually capturing them. It sounds a bit bureaucratic, but actually it was quite helpful.
It reminds me of lots of meetings I go to with minutes and action points, which I say not as a negative thing of making it sound bureaucratic, but what a good idea it is, and actually how normal it is. Because some people, I think, hear about ideas like this and might think, oh, what that might be, I don't know, infantilizing the person, or it seems like a strange addition to our everyday life. But actually, it's helpful to recognise that it's an aid to decisions made, and who's responsible for them is something we all benefit from.
But in actual fact, it was really, really useful in a time when Tony was a bit in the fog, and it gave him confidence, I think, that he wasn't, his choices weren't being just sort of ridden over roughshod, that he had actually had an input and that he'd had a chance to think about the pros and cons of a particular decision.
That's a really respectful thing to do. Cath, I can see you're keen to reveal your own decision book.
Well, yeah, no, I actually just want to overshare a personal thing. Jacquie, I really wish I'd heard that before. My dad used to have exactly that issue and tell my mum in front of me that she was incredibly bossy and doing things all the time and making all the decisions. And it was all, and I couldn't work out ever why the relationship seemed to have changed so much, because it had always been equal. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together, because I did know he had Alzheimer's later on. But at that point in time, I hadn't registered and put the 2 together. And it's such a good idea. It would have made such a big difference. So thank you for sharing that.
And I think it's also, just hearing you talk there, Cath, it's also another one of the many examples of where this is really about that. Someone might start saying, oh, it's a relationship issue, or someone's being very unreasonable. And actually it's a challenge that's been triggered by a very specific thing, a cognitive problem with remembering a decision. Yeah. So thank you both to hear that conversation. Karen, I wondered if you perhaps had some examples of decisions that you've helped people with, or anything in this area.
Well, I was just thinking that it's been such a well-rounded answer that I was thinking it from the anxiety point of view, that this question came in, saying that I find that my sister's anxiety reduces when I make decisions for her. So, and that made me think about how this sister was making best interest decisions, because she was seeing that clearly the person that was being cared for was anxious. So it made me think about the Mental Capacity Act, and actually if you do make decisions for people, it's always about doing it in their best interests. And what we can offer at RDS, it's a great opportunity to remind everybody, is that we're there in the direct support team to offer those one-to-one support calls, so that if a family member is finding that they're making decisions and they're not sure and they want to talk it through, they can actually have a direct support call with a member of the direct support team to actually talk it through and help them come up with some strategies.
Thank you, Karen. A really helpful reminder and addition. That's great. The next question, changing tack a little bit, is about resentment. And I think it's a great example of how I hope these meetings will always be a place where we can speak openly and honestly about not just good and cheerful and positive things, but also about the sort of tougher elements of the experience as well. And the question is simply, is resentment a common feeling for any carers? So I don't know who's asked that question, but I think we can all perhaps read into it and perhaps can think of our own experiences in which we've experienced resentment. And I wondered if that is a word which triggers any thoughts or associations for any of you here.
It's hard to feel resentful for somebody as an individual who's going through the experience of living with dementia. I sometimes felt resentful of the circumstances, but not of Tony. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, I think it's very common to, have those moments where you're sort of at the end of your tether a bit, like sort of if you've had sort of a rough day with him anyway, and then sort of like, I don't know, you're doing having to change him at the end of the day, and sort of like it's just sort of, you're just sort of at your wit's end a bit. I think resentment is a perfectly natural feeling. I think it's just, I don't know, we were quite lucky with Dad in that he was just sort of a very sort of calm, loving character. So sort of you could, even when you were sort of incredibly frustrated, he was sort of very easy still to sort of find him cute 30 seconds later. But yeah, no, I certainly wouldn't ever question if sort of feeling resentment is unnatural, feel bad because you resent them at that time. I think it's just, you've just got to try and find your own sort of coping mechanisms and to manage your own head a bit, I suppose.
Thanks, Ben. I think that's a really, really generous answer, which will enable a lot of people to sort of acknowledge their own feelings a bit, knowing that, as you say, that it's very common and a shared experience. Jo, did you want to come in on that one?
I did. I don't think we have any resentment at the moment in the family, certainly not towards Mum. But I do have worries that resentments will arise. My brother and sister don't live very close, whereas I live 5 minutes away from Mum. And they both work full time, whereas due to my own personal circumstances, I don't. So I worry that there is going to be resentment that I spend so much time with Mum, that I perhaps know more than they do, which is why I do try to keep them informed, but not always successful. I worry that maybe I might down the line resent that they're not as involved. I don't know. So resentment hasn't occurred yet, but it is a big worry that it will occur, and how will it occur, and how will it affect things. So yeah, I think that's a good question. It's different for everybody, but it's scary actually. It's really scary that our family dynamics are going to change, possibly. How will they change, and how will we all feel about each other, and what's going to happen? So yeah.
Thank you. That's a fabulous answer, and very, very generous and honest of you as well to talk about that. I think, Karen, you'd like to come in.
I wanted to say that, you know, the most natural feeling in the world at some point in caring, and, you know, please reach out and get the support that you need, whatever that support is, you know, whether that's talking to other family members or friends, but just remember we are here in the background. Not only do we have what will be this new young onsets carer support group, we've got 30 regional support groups around the country for carers. So no matter where you live, hopefully we'll have one not too far away from you that you'll be able to meet others that are walking that same path that you might be able to talk to and get some support with about how they come get over the resentment that they're experiencing. Thanks, Seb.
Thanks, Karen. That's a really, really poignant and helpful reminder. And I think absolutely I'd echo that and say, with all of these things, you are facing choppy waters and challenging and some unpredictable situations, and absolutely just don't, whatever you're feeling, you will feel all sorts of things, I'm sure, and have done, but don't feel any obligation to feel it in. Never feel any sense of duty to not feel a certain way. There's always someone who will be only too pleased to talk with you about how, whatever moment you're in, good or bad. Last question before I know we need to wrap up was just a very brief one that I was going to say about psychological support. Someone had written that psychological, in response to Emma's fantastic contribution, had said that psychological support has gone some way to help me as a carer, but it doesn't seem possible to connect with my husband, and whether we have any ideas. And I suppose, Karen may contribute to this, but I think it was just really briefly to reiterate the offer of that one-to-one support, to remind ourselves that all of the ideas that we're talking about are never right for everyone or for every moment. And there are some people who just, it's not their choice to be involved in psychological therapy. And also just a reminder that the psychological support, and particularly the more systemic types of psychological approaches that Emma was talking about, very much view dementia as something you as families are all facing together, not as something that is a problem in one person. And so it might be that not everyone individually wants to be in a conversation with a counsellor or therapist or anyone else, but other people within that family, within that group, within that friendship circle, having different, bringing ideas and different perspectives from those conversations might nonetheless help to support people in that difficult situation. Karen, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on that one.
Great answer. It's just, please, you know, do come to the direct support team and let us see if we can work with you as an individual family to come up with strategies.
Great. Well, I think it's my duty now. I don't think necessarily people have trains they've got to run away to in the good old days of face-to-face meetings. And I'm sorry we can't join you for a longer chat over tea and coffee and biscuits. But it's been lovely to see all of you. My huge thanks to everyone who's contributed, both on the screen today with the wonderful people in front of you, but also behind the scenes, the wonderful Millie and Nikki and Claire and others who've helped to arrange today's meeting. And of course, for you all for being here, and for the many people we hope will listen to the recorded version after the event. And I'm just going to hand back to Cath and to Jacquie if they want to say any final words. Thanks, everyone.
I'll hand over to Jacquie. I have nothing more to say apart from the fact that that was a fantastic meeting. So I think I should leave the last words with one of our lived experience presenters.
Say goodbye.
See you later.
Well, just to say thanks to everybody, as ever. You know, these sessions are sort of a mix of emotional, uplifting, challenging, and everything else. So look forward to the upcoming ones, and we'll be sending out details of the dates for those. Next year, we're moving to a format where we're going to have 2 online versions, and then we're going to meet once face-to-face in London, so we can have the tea and biscuits and the chats that Seb has promised us. Okay, so looking forward to that very much. In the meantime, thanks for everybody who's joined us, and for the good, great questions that we've had. And I really feel excited that this thing, which sort of started as a bit of an idea, as a gap among the suite of the RDS things, is really taking off and really, really proving value. So thanks to everybody. Over and out.
Thanks, Jacquie. Bye to everyone. Have good weekends.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate, and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund, held by the charity the National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia Support's 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support, and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations, and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby, and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through rare dementia support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.